Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. I'm Randy Wright, and I'll be your captain on this solo flight special edition of our state-of-the-art radio program. Folks, this will be the final boarding call, so if you please, claim your seats, fasten your seat belts, kick back, relax, and enjoy the show while I go ahead and delve into the pre-flight checklist, as there really is a lot of news and information to get to before I may fully indulge you with your in-flight entertainment. Well, folks, I'm sure you all noticed that the gutless opposition party, or GOP, nominee, Donald J. Trump, made a rather off-the-cuff trip to Mexico yesterday to have a discussion with the President of Mexico. Now, allegedly, this entire meeting transpired upon the invitation of the Mexican president, and he's now currently in a bit of hot water in his own home nation for inviting the mafioso quafioso into the country. This is due in small part to the fact that Donald J. Trump, ever since he first officially threw his quaff into the ring back in July of 2015, made the entire impetus of his campaign, the very thing that buoyed him to the top of the wide field of gutless opposition party contenders for the position of nominee, and allowed him to vanquish them. It was all based on him saying that Mexicans were rapists and criminals and what have you. And yes, there is that problem with a great many of the illegal aliens that have just been flowing through our porous southern border. However, there's no real diplomacy in the way that Trump has gone about his message of delivery. Now, there is a difference between diplomacy and the twin cancerous doctrines of political correctness and moral relativism that have been wielded as a weapon by the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists for generations. But what that difference is that diplomacy is used to advance America's interests and point of view, and it's to be within the realm of civil discourse, whereas political correctness is truly wielded as a weapon to try and strip and deprive the decent, honest, hard-working, red-blooded American citizens of their fundamental and inalienable God-given right of freedom of expression. So we see that the graduates of Pavlov School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media have been hyping up this rather unprecedented visit in which Trump went out there and tried to play the part of a cordial world leader, I guess in an attempt to convince the greater American electorate that he is somehow electable. And all of this comes on the heels of the fact that Donald J. Trump had begun to soften his position on the illegal alien problem. Once again, plying into that sort of mindset that he set out in his book, The Art of the Deal. Because if you remember, what he said in The Art of the Deal was that he would always go forth first with his most hardline position, thinking that that would not be what he would get, and then whittle it back to what he really wanted to do. And it's as my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, has oftentimes pointed out on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, that essentially what Don does is he gets it to a position where he can win, where he would say he'd cut and run if he thought he couldn't win a deal. Well, the problem with that is you can't do that when you are Commander-in-Chief of these United States of America. It takes the hardline work. It means making it something you can win no matter what the odds are, because there really is no secondary option for the United States, particularly when it comes to foreign affairs. And that's one area where Donaldolph Julius Caesar Trumpolini is exceedingly lacking. He has no experience with it, and it is glaringly obvious. And when he said back all those months ago during the primary process that he wouldn't consult with anybody but himself at first because he's got that bigly beautiful brain, that should be sounding off alarm bells and sending up red flags for the American citizens, because it shows that he really doesn't understand how to project and promote American interests when dealing with foreign powers. And in his past statements, he's gone out and praised tin-pot dictatorships and totalitarian regimes. Recall that back in the 80s, he praised the Chinese for their ruthlessness in handling the Tiananmen Square incident. He also praised Kim Jong-il for being the only one who could do the job that he did and was able to stand up to those generals who wouldn't have accepted him or tolerated him unless he had the characteristics of a leader. You know, it's this sort of baffling nonsense that should really concern people. Then when you see that he was asking State Department officials and defense officials why it is that we just can't nuke other nations, that is laughably absurd. But keep in mind, this is a man who had no idea what the nuclear triad was and is. Folks, for those of you who aren't aware, the nuclear triad is that three-prong approach to nuclear defense that the United States has had since the dark and twisted days of the Cold War. That is, our bomber force is the first part of it, then there are land-based surface-to-air missiles, and then there are also the submarines that are able to travel and traverse the globe and launch their payloads from anywhere without being known. In fact, that is the stealthiest arm of the nuclear triad. But Trump doesn't understand that stuff because he didn't care to look into it. He's shown just this unwillingness to learn and to be interested in those things that matter. And of course, that raises that nagging question that has been haunting us ever since he first officially threw his quaff in the ring back in last July, which was, what is his plan? What is he doing? Is he actually trying to win? And of course, I think the answer to that was originally no, but now he's drunk on power. He's drunk on this narcissistic personality disorder that plagues him. He just cannot seem to think that anything within the world can go forth without him being somehow a part of the center of the universe. He literally is egocentrical in that fact because he sees himself as the end-all be-all to anything and everything, and that is a dangerous mindset and ideology to have when you are vying for the highest office in the land. And what makes that even worse is that we know that the chief executive office has basically been expanded to something that it was never originally intended to be. In other words, we see that it is not limited to the scope and application and to the powers enumerated unto it by the clear and concise language of our shared United States Constitution. Again, it's Article 2 that clearly delineates and enumerates the power of the chief executive, and that is to the best of his ability to faithfully execute the laws of the land. But he's not doing that. Trump has shown and has stated that he would go out and continue the extra-constitutional abuse of authority, particularly with executive orders, that Barack Hussein Obama has done throughout his disastrous two-term regime. We can't afford that, folks. We have got to be getting back to strict adherence to the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. After all, that is the key to unlocking the chains and shackles that have been inhibiting and blocking and hampering the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. You see, going back to the design of our country, that foundational image that our founding fathers dreamed of during the inception of this country some 235 years ago, we are the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty. You can see that in the opening lines to the preamble to the United States Constitution, when it states in no uncertain terms that we, the people, do ordain and establish this Constitution in order to promote and create a more perfect union. Now, what they meant by more perfect is that they fully understood that mankind's natural inclination is not perfection, that mankind is wholly imperfect, and therefore the impetus of the natural law tenets that form the bedrock foundation of not only the Constitution, but also our representative Republican form of government is to make room for those imperfections and to try and harness something that seeks to improve. And that's why in Article 5 of the United States Constitution, as well as the language contained in the preamble to the Bill of Rights, we see that the United States Constitution is malleable, but not just on a whim. That demonstrates in no uncertain terms the infinite wisdom and foresight of our founding fathers, the realization that they had that because mankind is imperfect, that there is an avenue that will allow society to change the Constitution as is necessary over time, but not just to change it for the sake of change alone. That's why you have that arduous requirements of what is necessary to amend the United States Constitution. And that means getting 3/4 of the states to vote in favor of any of the changes. You have to have delegates to deliberate over it in the various methods that are allowed in Article 5, and therefore the Constitution really hasn't been amended that much because at the heart of it, the natural law tenets are immutable, meaning they are just as applicable today as they were at the inception of the Constitution, as God willing they will be centuries from now. But the other aspect of it is that we, in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, are expected to proactively maintain and safeguard those fundamental and inalienable rights which were endowed to us by our Creator, who happens to be none other than the God of nature himself. But Trump doesn't understand that. Trump is the one who went out there and basically claimed that the Constitution is a 12-article document, which is funny when there are only 7 articles in it. Now, of course, the Lion Branch Trumpidians gathered in their tabernacle and tried to work up some fallacious argument to claim that what Trump was really speaking about was the 10th Amendment, that would be the 12th article to our shared United States Constitution. Well, that's a mixture of equine and bovine excrement, because the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, and indeed all of the amendments to the United States Constitution are separate and apart from the articles. Now, pursuant to the language of Article 5 and that of the preamble to the Bill of Rights, yes, they are considered as part of the Constitution as if they had been there originally. That's because they're declaratory clauses that are used to enhance the Constitution, but it is not a part of the Articles, because the Articles are there to set out specific tasks of government, to enumerate certain powers. And of course, the most important Articles are the first 3, Articles 1, 2, and 3, which create the separate branches of government. This is part of the whole notion of checks and balances that was an inherent part of the creation of this Federalist representative republic of ours. And that's why the Constitution is so amazing. It's done to check the power of the central government, because our founding fathers inherently distrusted centralized power and authority, and with good reason, because when you go back and look at exactly what it was they were fighting against in that long, drawn-out, bloody affair known as the American War of Independence, you see that they were in that bitter battle with the centralized authority of the British Crown and Parliament. But over the years, entropy has set in, and the federal government has seen its power expand, particularly with the respect of the legislative branch of government, the 2 houses of Congress, meaning the House of Representatives and the Senate. They have basically delegated so much of their authority to these nameless, faceless, and ultimately unaccountable bureaucrats that it's allowing the executive branch to become a secondary legislature. Then when you see, going back to the opening decade of the 19th century with Marbury versus Madison, we see that the Supreme Court handed itself power which was not enumerated unto it by the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of Article 3, which is what established the judiciary. Now, there are some Article 1 courts that Congress creates, and Congress does have the power to create lesser branches of the federal judiciary. That means your circuit courts of appeals and your district federal courts. But other than that, they are separate and apart. And so these checks and balances were put there to ensure that not one singular branch of government or entity could come forth and become rogue, tyrannical, and ultimately illegitimate. But those checks and balances have been blurred significantly, and that has particularly been the case under the disastrous 2 terms of the Barack Hussein Obama regime. He has essentially gone out and consolidated power into the executive branch that was never originally intended to be a part of that branch of government. And so we, in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, must be cognizant and wary as well as aware of these developments. But Trump is going out there and being wishy-washy on his so-called immigration reform policy. Now, keep in mind that this was originally drafted, by the own admission of this man, by the Senator of Alabama, Jeff Sessions. Now, Jeff Sessions was once considered to be a stalwart conservative, but he essentially had abandoned those conservative principles when he decided to tie his fate inexorably with that of the mafioso quafioso, and therefore he has sold out for populism. Now, we've discussed populism on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, and have clearly demonstrated how every time it has reared its ugly head in these United States of America, it has never been for the implementation of the natural law tenets that form that foundation of our country and our Constitution. And that's because populism is ultimately a destructive thing. Now, in and of itself, it's not a bad thing, but when you try and redefine all of the things that are mandated by the Constitution, that is when you start to encounter some very serious problems. And it is what gives us here at the Wright Flyer a lot of reservation when it comes to the entire platform that has been espoused by the mafioso quafioso's Trump train. But back to this issue of immigration. We see that Trump originally, back in 2012, had come out and stated before the cameras of the graduates of Pavlov School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media that then nominee Mittens Romneykin's self-deportation plan was mean-spirited on a human level, that we had to be compassionate. Once again, bringing up all of this fluff and nonsense of a compassionate conservative. Now, what that presupposes is that conservatism in and of itself is lacking in compassion, and that our immigration laws, which are always to be made by Congress pursuant to Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, are inhumane. And so we see that he's doubling down on these efforts. Basically, he went out there and claimed that Barack Hussein Obama has deported a lot more people than what has been claimed. But again, this is laughable. First of all, it's laughable because the numbers that the government keeps espousing about how many illegal aliens are actually within the borders of the United States are well over a decade old. It does not account for the just waves of illegal aliens that have occurred, particularly in the summer of 2014 and again in 2015, all throughout the disastrous regime of Barack Hussein Obama, and therefore it's inaccurate. It's a bit like the way that they cook the books with the unemployment numbers to try and make it seem as though the economy is improving when it's not. But as we have stated before, the economy itself is just a symptom of the overarching disease that currently ails and afflicts this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. You see, it all goes back to the willingness of the government to divorce and distance itself from the supreme law of the land, which, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, what is known in the common vernacular as the Supremacy Clause, the Constitution itself is the supreme law of the land. Therefore, anything that is directly contradictory to the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of that sacred document is void ab initio. That means it does not have the binding force or effect of law going all the way back to its inception. Now, that may seem abstract, and I know that the alternative right or alt-right are sitting there claiming that those of us who wish to adhere to the fundamental tenets contained within the Constitution are delusional, that we're buying into a weak position that has no place in a fast-paced modern society like that in which we live today. But again, that is a bunch of bovine excrement, because when you stop and think about it, and look at what the historical revisionists and the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media and the overarching umbrella of the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists who desire nothing less than the complete and utter annihilation of the United States of America, both as a nation and as a people, you see that what they're doing is trying to hide the fact that our Constitution is the longest contiguous or uninterrupted running constitutional document in the entire course of human events. That means in all of world history there has never been, at least in this modern era, a nation that is as open, honest, or free as that of the United States of America. And this is why it's so baffling that Donald J. Trump never speaks about the Constitution. But if you stop and think about it, in an objective fashion, what's really happening with the mafioso quafioso is that he is no different than the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists. In fact, he has espoused most of their views for the vast majority of the 70 years that he has spent on God's green earth. Now, once he got back from this bizarre trip in Mexico, there was already a claim that he didn't discuss the funding of this wall. Because remember, that's been one of the lines he's touted over and over again to the point of ad nauseum all throughout the primary process. That we're going to build a wall, it's going to be a bigly beautiful wall, and Mexico's going to pay for it, perfect hair forever. Except that no, Mexico's not going to pay for it. And the fact that he went out and claimed to the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media that they didn't discuss it, and then the Mexican government comes out and says that actually they did discuss it, and they told him unequivocally in no uncertain terms that he could go to hell and that Mexico's not going to pay for the wall. It shows that once again there is this dichotomy in what's actually being said, and it casts the shadow of doubt back onto the positions of the mafioso quafioso. And of course that makes sense, because he said a lot of things throughout this entire disastrous 2016 presidential election cycle that are just bizarre and untrue. Remember during the lead up to the RNC that was held there in Cleveland, Ohio back in July, that Tim Tebow was going to be a speaker, except that Tim Tebow came out and said, no, I'm not. Nobody's talked to me about that. And then there were all of these instances where he went out and claimed endorsements when in fact none of the people who he was claiming, at least at that time, some of these high profile people that were legislators and senators, had actually officially endorsed him. They said without a doubt that they had not. It just goes to show that he plays fast and loose with the truth. And we don't need that anymore. We've already suffered through 2 terms of that under this disastrous Barack Hussein Obama regime. And I believe that this is the greatest tragedy of the 2016 presidential election cycle, which is just unfurling before our eyes as a disaster. Because when you recall just how unpopular the public policy positions of this Obama regime have been, and the fact that the gutless opposition party, or GOP, has been squishy in the last successive 2 presidential election cycles, this was supposed to be the election cycle where we went back to conservatism. But then enter the wrecking ball of Don Trumpolini, the mafioso quafioso himself. He just goes out and spews all of the shallow, hollow, empty, and meaningless platitudes that really do not have any meaning or emphasis or impetus in an open and honest society like that of the United States of America. And so he has just gone out and made all of these promises which he can't keep, and shown a disregard for our constitutional form of government and our representative Republican form of government, as well as being embraced by the alternative or alt-right. And that is not a good position, because it plays directly into the hands of these stereotypical caricatures which the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists attempt to use to pigeonhole the right, and have done so for generations. He essentially satiates those, he satisfies those, and allows them to go forth with the mantra of, see, looky, 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 the Republican war on women that we've been harping about that's really a bunch of bovine excrement, well, now it exists because of Don Trumpolini and his just vulgarian style. And, of course, the war on minorities, it's there too. Now, I can already hear the shrill voice of the alt-righters coming out and saying that, well, you're just afraid of being labeled a racist. No, I couldn't give a damn. But here's the thing. You have to be intelligent in the way that you're going forward, because you're going to have to reach out to other people. Now, I'm not saying that that means placate to moderates. No, you have to sell your message. Your candidate has to earn votes. But those that are espousing this tyranny of false unity don't understand that. They don't care about that, because in their mind, it's a false math. Their false math, the thing that they adhere to, is they claim that if you don't vote for Donald J. Trump, you are thereby voting for Hillary Clinton, as if those are the only 2 candidates available. Well, then they try and say that, well, that's just the way it works. Well, no, it doesn't. A net gain of 0 for either of the 2 candidates for the mainstay political parties is not an addition to one or the other. It really isn't. Now, it would be if you stayed home, perhaps, but again, it's still not actually adding a vote to anyone. It's just subtracting a vote from the entire pool. Now, that's fine. You know, you're allowed to vote your conscience. That is one of those fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. But the way that the Lion Branch Trumpidians and the detente wing of the gutless opposition party have been going about this, they are trying to shame us into a tyranny of false unity. Well, folks, it's not going to work. Donald J. Trump has the highest negatives of any candidate since that has been recorded. And it has shown time and again that there is this undeniable pattern that when your negatives approach even half of what Donald Trump has, you don't win elections. Now, of course, one of the strengths that they try and claim is playing in favor of the Don Trumpolini is the fact that Hillary Rotten Clinton is very unpopular with the Democrats. In fact, she is the weakest Democrat nominee in the past half century. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter when he goes out and continues to try to reach out to disenfranchised, Noid-face Boy-Me Sanders voters when they are socialists. He is the epitome of all that they loathe and despise. Remember, their war was against that of the so-called 1%, the billionaires. Well, Trump is bigly rich and greedy, remember? after his victory in New Hampshire, he went in front of the cameras of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media to reiterate that, well, I'm greedy for the country, and now we're all going to get rich. Well, no. The socialists don't want everyone to get rich. They just want free excrement. That's what they're about. That's what their entire goal and agenda has been about. And that is why they gravitated to the nerd-face Vermont Senator, Bernie Sanders. It's not that he had good policies. It's just that there is this entitlement mentality that has been foisted upon the up-and-coming generations by the historical revisionists that infest our institutions of education from coast to coast and border to border, and it shows no signs of getting any better at any time within the foreseeable future. And so when Donald Trump goes out and says that he doesn't even need nor does he want the support of true constitutional compositionists or constitutional conservatives, that is sending an unmistakable message to us that he is essentially attempting to kick us out of our own party. When he said that it was the Republican Party and not the Conservative Party, what he was saying is, conservatives, get the hell out. We don't want you. We don't need you. We're going to reach out to socialists because, after all, the mafioso quafioso, for the vast majority of his 70 years of life, has been a dyed-in-the-wool, frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist leftist. Look at the way that he donated to Terry McAuliffe some $14,000 or more as late as 2014. Look at the way that he supported Hillary Clinton. He donated over $100,000 to the Clinton Foundation. So here we are. We are facing this inexorable problem, and the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media are going to eat this up because they can paint Trump as a flip-flopper on a scale that's even worse than that of John Kerry. Remember, back in 2004, John Kerry said, well, I was for the war before I was against it. And that was one of the things that killed him. But Donnie is even worse. He makes Kerry look as though he is a paragon of stability and of consistency and of predictability. These are the things we can't ignore, and the things that are going to be disastrous in that general election cycle slated for later this November. Now, one of the other recent developments that has caught my attention is something that Sean Hannity did. He's gone out and essentially claimed that he's laying the blame for any Trump loss at the feet of Glenn Beck and other never-Trumpers who just do not trust the New York vulgarian. And it's a bit of a shame to see that that's the case, because it shows that the mafioso quafioso is doing everything in his power to dismantle and destroy conservative media. But when you think of it in a way as that he's trying to build a new media empire unto himself that he can dominate, essentially Trump News Network, it would be the type of tactic and strategy employed by Trump in his past business dealings. These are things we just can't escape. They're there. It's open. It's obvious. And it must be addressed. And it's just shocking to see how far Sean Hannity has fallen, although it is predictable, because he's always been the one to jump on to just a quick bandwagon to try and capitalize on something that might buoy his ratings, but it just makes him a charlatan and a huckster, because if you recall, in the past he's claimed that he's a conservative first and a Republican second. Then why is he embracing a man who has not once in his entire life, except magically just before he decided to officially throw his quaff into the ring, espouse conservative views, live up to conservative views? That's the sort of question that needs to be answered, but the so-called conservative commensurate and punditry just is not doing it. By and large, they just aren't. But one of the things that has been just recurring throughout this 2016 presidential election cycle thus far is a lot of people have been attacking Glenn Beck. Now, Glenn Beck may be rough on the edges. A lot of people may think he's kooky because he's gone out and made a lot of these predictions and has done some comedy-type skits that may not fit with everyone's flavor. But I think what Glenn Beck has done is stayed true to his principles. You've got to give credit where credit's due. Glenn Beck has warned of the disaster that the Donaldoff would be and that he would not be able to defeat Hillary Rotten Clinton. And that's the same warning that we've been making here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. It is a common denominator. It is a common thread, one that cannot be ignored because it is a true, drastic problem that we are facing in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. But Hannity has gone so far out of his way to try and claim throughout the primary process that he was not playing favorites when, of course, that's not true. And what's so intellectually disingenuous about that is, if you stop and think about it, that's the same type of tactics and strategies employed by the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media. They are the ones that go out and claim that they are being objective journalists when in fact they are engaging in sensationalism. There's no way around that, and that is literally what they have been doing since the times of William Randolph Hearst at the turn of the 20th century with his newspaper conglomerates. Now, why would I give such impetus to William Randolph Hearst? Why do I keep pointing to that? It's because there is a pattern here, and I know that there are many within the rank and file of conservatives who are wondering just how the salivating mainstream media became what it is. Well, we see that there is this history that can be traced. That William Randolph Hearst basically trumped up stories and was the father of yellow journalism that pushed the United States entry into the Spanish-American War of 1898. He sensationalized tales. He went after famous movie actor Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle and essentially ruined his career. It's sensationalizing a murder case that really wasn't murder. It was that Virginia Rapé, the woman that died in Fatty's apartment, had been a prolific drinker and had a ruptured bladder from Prohibition-era liquor. And her doctors had told her not to drink anymore. But again, that didn't sell newspapers. So we see that the salivating mainstream media continues to go down that path, continues to sensationalize stories, and just isn't about the truth. It's all about ratings. It's all about making money. And we see now that in this 2016 election cycle, which I have labeled the election cycle of betrayal, that Don Trumpolini's bizarre ascendancy has done the same thing in the alleged conservative commensurate and punditry. Look at the way that Laura Inkampf and her little writer there, Edmund Kozak, the cucksucker at LifeZets, or whatever the hell the name of her alternative right drivel is called. It's just, again, these attacks on the Constitution, this idea of pushing populism, all for money and ratings. It shows that they never once really believed in the message that they were preaching in election cycle after successive election cycle, year after year, claiming to be in full support of our foundational documents and who we are as a nation and as a people. And when you see that that is the current state of affairs with respect to the so-called right-wing media, it should give us a moment to pause, to wonder if they were ever serious, or if there is some sort of quaff dust, magic quaff dust, that makes people fall over themselves to be apologists for the New York Vulgarian. And I think it's a combination of both. They like this cult of personality, this cult of celebrity that once again goes back to the days of the silent movies when Hollywood stars began setting trends in America back in the 1920s, and even before that, really. It goes to show that people who really should not be given the amount of credit that they have been given are now seen as some paragons of intelligence and virtue because they can go out and act while not actually knowing who they themselves are. And so they are suckers for everything. They are what the old term of limousine liberal refers to, even though that's a bastardization of the term liberal. Again, it all ties into that dark and twisted game of semantics that we've been discussing since our premiere episode, which aired on September 11th of 2015. And by the way, folks, happy 1st of September. We here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, are looking forward to that 1-year anniversary. We've been taking you over the friendly airwaves for nearly a year now, folks, so we have reached a milestone here at the Wright Flyer. But back to this whole notion of Sean Hannity essentially saying that anyone who doesn't march lockstep behind the mafioso quafioso is to be blamed for Hillary Rotten Clinton's victory, which is seeming more and more inevitable as we draw ever closer to that looming general election cycle. I've got to sit there and say, stop. Just stop doing that. Stop destroying your credibility. You've already damaged and hampered it. Now, why would you want to go even further? Well, it has to do with ego. It has to do with the ego of the man and the fact that he has so pridefully and is so proud of the fact that he has just come forth and supported the mafioso quafioso that he can't go out and save face. And the same is happening with Lush Bimbo. Remember, we discussed that caller that just was essentially what Glenn Beck called the call heard around the world, where Rush said, well, yuck, I didn't push it because I didn't think he was serious on it. Well, why didn't you share that information with your listeners? After all, don't you claim to be America's truth detector? Don't you claim to be the quote-unquote doctor of democracy, even though we here in these United States of America are a constitutionally endowed federalist representative republic and not some sort of a democracy or direct democracy? So wouldn't it be the wise thing to do to go out and share that with your listeners? We here at Radio Aviation Excellence produce our programs for you. We want to empower you. And therefore, we had always said throughout the primary process that we had endorsed Ted Cruz because of the way that he stood for the Constitution. And again, we've also made it perfectly clear time and again that we are loyal to the Constitution, not to one particular candidate, not to one political party, because in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, that means you, our cherished listening passengers and audience members, as well as me, my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, my first air marshal, Mr. Nelson Ward, all of us who are American citizens are the ones that are called to be loyal to the Constitution and nothing else. But again, remember that Donald J. Trump had gone out and said that those who were going to vote for him had to swear an oath of fealty and loyalty to him. Now that's just bizarre. That has no place in an open, honest, but above all free society like the United States of America. And so what it shows is we are in a dangerous position where there are people who proactively seek a totalitarian because they are looking for some messianic figure to come down and save them. But when you really stop and think about it, the way that this representative republic was formed, and the intent of our founding fathers was not to have it to where one individual could have all the answers, because the contrapositive of that is that same individual would also possess the power to single-handedly destroy the republic. And again, it draws back to this whole notion that the problems facing our once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns can be traced back to all of these efforts by the frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist leftists who have hostilely taken over the Democrat Party years ago to dismantle us, to distance us and divorce us from the supreme law of the land, which is none other than our shared United States Constitution. But the Constitution itself is the key, folks. It's been with us since the inception of our nation some 235 years ago. It is what propels us to become the great nation that we have been during this relatively brief yet illustrious history of ours, and it is why we have the longest contiguous or uninterrupted running constitutionally endowed republic in the entire course of human events. Again, this all ties into the rationale of the natural law tenets that underpin our entire system of polity. And it is based on a social contract. So that means that we, the people, in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of sovereignty, are a party to that contract. And there are terms and stipulations within that contract that essentially state that with every freedom and liberty and fundamental right that is endowed to us by our Creator, the God of nature himself, there couches an equally powerful duty, obligation, but above all responsibility. And with respect to our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights, the mainstay duty, obligation, and responsibility is that to proactively maintain and safeguard our rights. It's why in the First Amendment it says that the people can petition the government for a redress of grievances. It's essentially written into the very clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. But apparently Sean Hannity, or Wanity, or whatever name he wants to go by as the chief priest of the Trumpidian tabernacle, doesn't want to discuss it. He doesn't care about that. He's bought into the fame and the totalitarianism, and it's disgusting. Now, Glenn Beck has come out and said that he will not reciprocate to what Sean Hannity did, that he will not hold him accountable for Hillary's victory or for any of the damage that will happen. And the reason he's saying that is we've got to stop the division. That's the point that Beck is trying to make, and that we will need to turn to these people to rebuild the conservative movement once the dust settles and this fiasco of a 2016 election cycle has been relegated to the annals of history. But as much as I admire Beck, I have to disagree with him here, and I do so most cordially and most respectfully, because we have to hold people accountable. That's part of what it means to be self-accountable, self-reliable, and with those things working in conjunction, thereby self-determinate. For far too long now, we have been pushing away from holding people accountable for their words, deeds, and actions. The twin cancerous doctrines of political correctness and moral relativism, both of which we have declared war upon here at Radio Aviation Excellence the Wright Flyer, have been implemented in such a way and executed in such a way as to destroy the notion of holding people accountable. You see it in the way that the Barack Hussein Obama regime has wanted to go out and claim that we shouldn't call felons felons, because that would be mean-spirited. It's all about this fluff of raw emotionalism. But again, as we have oft-times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, you have to hold people accountable. That's the only way that you're going to maintain a free society. And it is basically the quintessential nature and aspect that forms the basis of the proper form of government, the proper scope and application of government as outlined and, yes, mandated by the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. So all of these things reflect upon us and reflect upon what we have to do. And we do have to be proactive. We do have to pay attention to our roles. And that's why people like Edmund Cucksucker are just so destructive. When they sit there and try and say that the Constitution is merely a piece of paper, is just a piece of paper, and that those of us who admire it for its history and respect the fact that, pursuant to Article 6, Clause 2, what is known in the common vernacular as the Supremacy Clause, understand that it is the supreme law of the land, we're somehow delusional. But no, he's the one that is trying to foist upon some alien and foreign ideology that truly has no place in an open and honest as well as free society like that of the United States of America. And that's this alternative right thinking. And so many are trying to say that they have a dubious claim on the conservative title. Well, okay, yes, I'll agree that their claim is dubious, but guess what? As we have warned on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, the erroneous perceptions, the false perceptions in the arena of American politics are oftentimes much more powerful and much more meaningful than reality itself. That is one of the true dangers that we encounter in our system of polity. And it's something that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists have known about for a century and a half now. And it's what has allowed them to incrementally push for this fundamental transformation of the United States of America away from being a constitutionally endowed, federalist, representative republic in which we, the people, are the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, into a centralized government and Fabian socialist, almost Orwellian dystopia. Now, I don't want to see that happen to our nation because I know what our founding fathers had meant for this nation to be. Think back to what Benjamin Franklin told to that young woman when she came up to him in the immediate aftermath of the Constitutional Convention. She asked him, Mr. Franklin, what have you given us? And with the perfect sagacity that is truly a cornerstone of the character of the man who was one of our brilliant founding fathers, he said, "A republic if you can keep it." So you see, from the statement that Franklin made there, the onus of responsibility is squarely upon the shoulder of the true, absolute sovereigns, we the people. And it goes back to this whole idea that our federal government is based on delegated authority, and that authority was delegated unto it by we the people, the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty. That is why the opening lines to the preamble to our shared United States Constitution starts with we the people. It's saying who came together in order to delegate certain limited authority onto the federal government to act on our behalf. That is why it is a representative republic. Again, I need to stress that we are not a democracy, because that is one of the things that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists have been using in order to try and distract and confuse people time and again. We are not a direct democracy because a federalist representative republic fully recognizes the rights of the individual popular sovereign, whereas a democracy only represents and recognizes the rights of a majority. This is what is known as a tyranny of a majority. And Benjamin Franklin, once again, gave us the best example of this, to demonstrate this, to illustrate it. And he said, democracy is essentially where you have 2 wolves and 1 sheep voting for what's for dinner. Well, the tyranny of the majority is going to make that lamb be dinner each and every time. However, a direct democracy can also have what is known as a tyranny of the minority, in which that lamb could sit there and vote that the wolves have to starve to death each and every time. That is the type of trap, the muck and morose, that our founding fathers were trying to avoid by developing these United States of America as a constitutionally endowed federalist representative republic as opposed to a direct democracy. Folks, this is why it is so important to foster that fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution and thereby our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights, because it allows you to open your eyes to the direct threats that are truly encroaching upon your rights. You see, without our rights, we have nothing. That is one thing that my first officer, Jeremy Grapington, has oft-times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. Because if we are not proactive in maintaining and safeguarding our fundamental and inalienable rights, then the government can waltz in and claim that we have to live a certain way. They can determine whether or not we live or die. They can say what we can do for a living, how much we can earn. They can micromanage the facets of our daily lives from cradle until grave. And that's why Alexis de Tocqueville said that anyone who supports any flavor, form, or facet of socialism is essentially a New Age feudalist, because feudalism is a caste system in which the ruling elites carve out a special niche for themselves and do not abide by the same rule of law that the general population does, and they can micromanage the daily facets of our lives. Think about the way that the serfs were not allowed to leave their property. In fact, there's an English term for it that we use, but its connotation has been changed. A villain was a landless peasant, one that had to rely upon the good graces of his or her landlord. They couldn't marry without the permission of the Lord. They couldn't have children without the permission of the Lord. They couldn't own their property. They couldn't leave or travel of their own free will or fruition. That goes directly against the sorts of freedoms, independence, and rugged individualism that are hallmarks of the American identity to this very day. And again, it's all based on those natural law tenets that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist and their allies in the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media and those historical revisionists who infest and have infiltrated our institutions of education from coast to coast and border to border don't want you to know. They don't want you to think about it, because then you can challenge their dark, twisted machinations and propagandistic, frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist agenda. And unfortunately, we've seen this battle for the hearts, souls, and minds of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people, come to the forefront in this 2016 presidential election cycle. We see that the cancerous doctrines of political correctness and moral relativism are just further infiltrating our society, and it is dividing us. But we have so much with respect to intellectual disingenuousness going around, particularly with the bizarre ascension of the New York billionaire, businessman, real estate tycoon, and all-around vulgarian Donald J. Trump. Because he goes out and claims to be a conservative, when, truth be told, if you look at his past record and history, which I know that the Lion Branch Trumpidians have received the message from on high at the tabernacle to say that we shouldn't look into his past, you see that he has supported all of those nefarious, frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists, the worst offenders of attempting to force us into this untenable, unsustainable, and unacceptable situation. And recall that when he was on a CNN town hall meeting, the mafioso quafioso, when asked what the three purposes or functions of government are, he said that it was housing, education, and healthcare, which is not found in the clear and concise language of our shared Constitution. It is an intellectually disingenuous position that he held. And I've got the audio that I'm going to cue up right now.
To meet Robert Keitlinger. He's retired from the U.S. Army after serving in Iraq and Afghanistan. He's now a student at Marquette University, and he says he's undecided. Welcome. Robert?
Good evening, Mr. Trump. In your opinion, what are the top 3 functions of the United States government?
Say it again.
In your opinion, what are the top 3 functions of the United States government?
Well, the greatest function of all by far is security for our nation. I would also say healthcare. I would also say education. I mean, there are many, many things, but I would say the top 3 are security, security, security. We have to have security for our country so that we can continue to exist as a country. We are in danger. Thousands and thousands of people are infiltrating our country.
So right there, you heard that he tries to couch it in security, tries to be very hawkish, except that he's not very hawkish when you get down to it. But housing and education and healthcare, he mentions housing later on in it, but it just goes to show that he doesn't really know what the proper scope and application of government is. And really, the top 3 important things that the government is designed to do is to ensure that the American people are free from encroachment or threats so that they can engage in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are the 3 things. Government is to provide for that, to secure for that, to provide for the common defense. It's all clear. It's all within the preamble to the United States Constitution to form a more perfect union. That is what it's about. It is to ensure that our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights are protected. But Donald J. Trump doesn't recognize that or realize that. It's because he has always espoused these frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist positions until just magically, before he decides to throw his quaff into the ring, he changes. He does a 180. Now, folks, I don't believe that people change their tune that rapidly. I don't believe that Donald J. Trump really believes the changes that he's made. And that's why he has been consistently inconsistent all the time that he's been out on the campaign trail. These are the things we cannot ignore. These are the things that really should not be swept under the rug, but the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media have swept it under the rug. Now, he said all of this back in March. Now, he'll claim maybe it was a mistake, or he misspoke, or it's to allow the people to do that, or to leave it to the states. But no, what he did there was, in a very candid moment, he went out and said that he literally believed that the top 3 positions of government was, other than security, housing, healthcare, and education. Now, you're not going to find that in the clear and concise language of our shared United States Constitution, unless, of course, you're looking at Article 9, Section Existent, Clause 0, which is nestled right next to the bovine excrement and equine excrement clauses. But truth be told, our government is not supposed to engage in those sorts of things. It's because if you go back to the tenets of federalism, that really should be left to state and federal, or not federal, but state and local governments to handle. That our founding fathers believed that the closer that the government got to the people, the more power the people exerted over the government. And think about it too. Logistically speaking, which level of government is best equipped to address the particularized problems and incidents that will arise with respect to particular geographical regions? Because the problems that we encounter in Texas are going to be different than those in Michigan, than in New York, than in California. That's why we have to have the local governments and the state governments possess plenary or near absolute power. But again, it still has to be restricted. Because think, when the states ratified the Bill of Rights, that means that they have also subjected themselves unto it. This is the sort of natural order of things that the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist and their allies in the rank and file of the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media, as well as the historical revisionist and Common Core education type, don't want us to think about, don't want us to consider. It's because they don't want it to destroy their dark and twisted machinations that truly have no place in an open, honest, but above all free society like that of the United States of America. When Trump got home from his bizarre meeting in Mexico, he went to Arizona to deliver a stump-thumping rally speech, but it was really meant to be a policy speech. The problem was he was once again skimping on policy, and I think the reason for that is that Trump doesn't know what policy is. He doesn't understand how government is to work or what his position as leader of the gutless opposition party is really all about, and that really does leave us in an untenable and dangerous situation. The sad truth of the matter is we could ill afford to allow ourselves to be plunged into these shallow, hollow, empty, and meaningless platitudes, because those sorts of things truly cannot win a general election cycle. And it's very tragic that it was even able to propel him into the position as the official nominee for the gutless opposition party, or GOP. But it shows just how disillusioned people have become. And it's why we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, have named the mafioso quafioso as the Pied Piper of disillusioned conservatives. He essentially figures out what issue resonates with the people, and then he plays to it, but he doesn't stay consistent with the message. And you could see that in the way that we have to be humane about the deportation thing, and the way that he was still going to push for touchback amnesty. He was selling out. And that's exactly what he did. It's all what he laid out in the Art of the Deal, stating that he would assume the most hardline position at first to then whittle his way back to what he wanted. And recall that Paul Manafort, before he got sacked, and before Texas Senator Ted Cruz had suspended his bid for the White House, said that it's all just an act, and that once the general election cycle got started, we'd begin to see the real Donald Trump. Well, I think we do see the real Donald Trump, a man who stands for nothing and is just about self-aggrandizement, who thinks that the nation can be run as a business, but truth be told, the nation cannot be run as a business. The reason it can't be is that our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights hang in the background, and they hang in the balance, and they cannot be negotiable. They just cannot be placed on the bargaining table. But Trump says everything's negotiable. And he hasn't done anything to couch that. He hasn't done anything to clearly and demonstrably show that he is not going to try and place our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights on the table. In fact, he's done the exact opposite. Remember, he said that he supported the no-fly, no-buy, and if you mention due process, we cry restrictions. Look, due process has to be a part of any type of deprivation of rights, because if you don't hold those rights as sacrosanct, you are thereby allowing the government to assume a totalitarian position that our founding fathers never once intended for it to be. And it goes back to the original intent of what is contained within the clear and concise language that form the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. They say it's negative rights. Well, they try and spin that as if it's a bad thing, but no, it really isn't. Because when you stop and think about it in an objective fashion, you find that with holding the power of the government, restraining the power of the government to trample upon our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights is necessary to ensure that our freedoms and liberties continue to be at the epicenter of this constitutionally endowed federalist representative republic of ours. Of course, the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists don't want us to discuss that. They don't want us to think about that. They want us to think that equality does not mean equal opportunities, but rather that it means equal outcome. Well, bovine excrement, that is not who we are either as a nation and as a people, and it's why they are trying so drastically to fundamentally change the United States. Remember that Obama said that when he was vying for the highest office in the land the first time, all the way back in 2008. And I'll cue up the soundbite for that, just because I think it's so important and on point with what I'm trying to say here.
We are 5 days from fundamentally transforming the United States of America.
So you see, they make no bones about what it is that they are wanting to accomplish. They aren't trying to withhold it anymore. This literally is what they believe. And unfortunately, this is what they've been able to do for the past disastrous 2 terms of this Barack Hussein Obama regime. Why? It's due part and parcel to the fact that the gutless opposition party, or GOP, has done nothing, literally nothing, to withstand him, to resist him, and that has placed us in this untenable situation. So we, in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, are going to have to come together, standing shoulder to shoulder in solidarity and unity to combat these just despicable things that have no place in an open, honest, but above all free society like that of the United States of America. And this all focuses around the notion that we are the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty. That's what the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialists want to take away from us. They don't want us to consider ourselves as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty because they realize that means we can stand up to and challenge their attempts to fundamentally redefine the United States of America both as a nation and as a people. And of course, that their goal is to do that, so that they can then amass even greater power onto themselves in an illicit fashion, at the great expense of we the people. Again, this is why it is so important for us to foster that fluent and working knowledge and understanding of our shared United States Constitution and thereby our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights, because that is how we stand up to the government and petition them for a redress of grievances. There's no other way, and that is why the government was designed the way that it was by our founding fathers in their infinite wisdom and foresight. All of that further explains why it's so dangerous to have Trump go out there and try and say that the 3 most important duties, obligations, but above all responsibilities of the federal government is to provide housing, health care, and education. Well, no, that's really not a good system because, again, it tramples upon the individual rights of the popular sovereigns. It allows the government to thereby step in and begin indoctrinating the up-and-coming generations with an eye on those generations which have yet to be born. Think of the way that the re-education camps worked in George Orwell's 1984. The way that Big Brother would manipulate the people. That is what we are trying to avoid. But of course, with modern technology, it becomes all the easier for that type of dystopia to come to fruition and to become a reality, and that really is a frightening thing to think of. Go back to the way that Edward Snowden had exposed the method in which the National Security Agency, or NSA, had been doing unfettered spying on American citizens in direct violation of the Fourth Amendment. You see, when we distance and divorce ourselves from the clear and concise language contained within the 4 corners of our shared United States Constitution, that's when we start to encounter these sorts of extra-constitutional and disastrous policies that are literally destroying the societal fabric of this once thriving and flourishing representative republic and vibrant community of popular sovereigns of ours. There's no way around that. But the way that the Lion Branch Trumpidians in their tabernacle have been suffering from acute ostrich syndrome, in other words, instead of shoving their heads in the sand, they've shoved them up their posterior, is just incorrigible. It shows that they're looking for a messianic figure, that they're closing their hearts, souls, and minds to any type of real evidence against their fearless leader, and that is distracting and destructive because, again, it makes them embrace these alt-right points of view. It makes them just become rigid to the point of being a caricature of what the right is. And, of course, they fall into the trap of fulfilling and satisfying all of those two-dimensional stereotypical caricatures that the frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist left attempts to pigeonhole the right with. And Donald J. Trump has only been stoking the flames of that fire. And it is giving Hillary Rotten Clinton all of the ammunition she needs to simply coast into the White House. Again, this is why we tried to say that we should not entrust the New York vulgarian, the mafioso quafioso, with the reins of the power of the party to be the nominee for the gutless opposition party or GOP, because it is dangerous, because it is untenable and unsatisfactory and unsustainable. That's why we as a nation and as a people need to take a step back and reflect upon these things that are challenging us. These hurdles, obstacles, and adversities that have been placed in our path must be overcome. And we must get back to understanding what it is that is at the foundation of these United States of America. And as we have so oft-times reiterated on previous episodes of Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, it means getting back to basics. And basics are found within the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. That is the reality that we need to embrace. That is where Glenn Beck is right when he said that we will need to rebuild. We will, because they are essentially setting all of these brush fires that are threatening to rage out of control and to destroy the edifice of our nation and the entire constitutionally endowed representative republic that our founding fathers gave us. And it goes back to what Benjamin Franklin said to that young woman. We have given you a republic if you can keep it. But that means we must be proactive. That means that we must hold people accountable. And that's why I was having that little bit of a disagreement with Beck, because he's essentially saying we shouldn't hold Hannity accountable for his own words, deeds, and actions, and therefore it places us in a very untenable situation. It means that all of these divisive tactics and strategies, particularly of divide and conquer, are being employed successfully to destroy the national character, heritage, and identity of the American people by attacking our spirit as well. You see, the frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist leftists want the American people to be embarrassed by the fact of who we are, by their identity. Therefore, they employ the historical revisionists to try and say that America was founded upon a sin, where when you look at the context of what was happening at that time, you'll find that the United States of America was the most open, honest, and free society that the world had yet seen and has ever seen. Again, that's why our constitutionally endowed Federalist Representative Republic is the longest contiguous or uninterrupted running republic of its nature in all world history. Rome may have had a republic that lasted for a long time, but there were many interruptions in it, and it was certainly not based on the same natural law tenets that form the bedrock foundation of not only our shared constitution, but indeed our very republic itself. These are the truths that we must embrace. This is the message we must convey to those who would do everything in their power to strip and deprive us of our fundamental and inalienable rights, which were endowed to us by our Creator, who is none other than the God of nature himself. Now, there's an interesting piece on the New Americana that says that conservatives should provide an optimistic alternative to crony capitalism, because we see that Donald J. Trump is the personification of those disastrous policies that are working against us, both as a nation and as a people. It is truly a unique perspective, one in which we have to look through the lens of what is facing us to determine what's important. Crony capitalism is not important, other than it has been used as another one of those sticks to be utilized by the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists. They are the ones that go out of their way to divide and conquer the American people. Their goal is to pit American citizen against American citizen in the hopes that we rip out each other's jugular and allow the lifeblood of this nation to drain to such a point that it's so anemic that they can do what Barack Hussein Obama wanted to do from the very beginning, which is to fundamentally transform the nation. There's no escaping that, folks. That is who they are. That is what they're pushing for. And they will double down on their efforts because they believe that they are driven by some divine revelation to accomplish that. It is within their hearts, souls, and minds to push for it. But literally, it is not in the best interest of the people because the way that our Constitution currently lays out the proper form, scope, and application of government, it's that power must be strictly limited because it is delegated unto the government from the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. Again, that is the quintessential message. That is the positive message that needs to be pushed forth. Crony capitalism should be discarded for free market. Free market, in which the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people, have a say. That's what is beautiful about the vision that our founding fathers had at the foundation of this great land of ours. They inherently understood that that was the way in which to ensure that these United States of America would reach such lofty heights in our relatively brief yet illustrious history. We are so fortunate. We are so fortunate because that birthright allows us to move forward and to understand what our proper role, obligation, and indeed what our set of responsibilities are for the nation, to push this nation back onto the path to prosperity, because again, that is inherently our duty, obligation, and above all, responsibility. And the fact that Trump and the Lion Branch Trumpidians don't see the imperative importance of this just gives us more reason to pause, gives us more reason to wonder what he would do to the nation. We can't afford to go forth with an unknown or a loose cannon because the consequences are far too dire. The nation literally is under the great threat that it has been for a long time, but the threat is much greater than in generations past. And it's because of this lackadaisical nature of the gutless opposition party, particularly with respect to the detente wing thereof, because they are the ones that have essentially empowered the Democrats to continue to whittle away at the societal fabric of these United States of America, even when they were a minority party. We see that they're still able to get their twisted machinations across. And it's because people like Benedict Arnold, Paul Ryan, Speaker of the House, and Senate Majority Leader Mitch the Turtle McConnell just don't have the backbone to act, that they are collaborating with these frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists in the complete dismantling of our proper government, the proper auspices of government. And that is something that cannot be ignored. But it also cannot be allowed to be manipulated to such a degree that we are abandoning the proper scope and application of government as mandated by the clear and concise language contained within the four corners of our shared United States Constitution. There's no way around that, folks. And, of course, the graduates of Pavlov's School of Journalism for the salivating mainstream media don't want to cover it. Why? Because, again, they have a dark and twisted, frothing-at-the-mouth Fabian socialist agenda that truly has no place in an open, honest, but above all free society like that of the United States of America. And therefore we, in our capacity as the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty in this once thriving and flourishing representative republic of ours, must stand together, shoulder to shoulder, in solidarity and unity to tell them no. You see, that is such a powerful, monosyllabic word in the English vernacular that is almost universally understood, and it is the word we can use to place this nation back onto the path to prosperity. because there really is no choice. And you know, if the optics weren't already bad enough with this disastrous 2016 presidential election cycle, one of Donaldov's, Julius Caesar Trumpolini's little underlings there in Rudy Giuliani, the man who liked to dress up in drag and do comedy skits with Trump years and years ago, put on a hat during a Trump rally that said, "Make Mexico great again." Now why? Why are they now going out and perverting that already shallow, hollow, empty, and meaningless platitude that has been the campaign slogan of the mafioso quafioso's entire candidacy? It's bad. But you see, the other one that Trump has started embracing now is an even more disgusting platitude. It can't get any worse. Really? You don't think it can get any worse, Donnie? You don't think that your candidacy could be more destructive than what you're letting on? Again, these sorts of things may appear cutesy on the surface, they may appear entertaining on the surface, but when you're dealing with the fundamental and inalienable God-given rights of the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people of these United States of America, that's no laughing matter. That shouldn't come down to mere entertainment. Our rights, and indeed our very sovereignty, hang in the balance, and we can ill afford to allow these feckless politicians, and granted, during the speech that Trump made the other night, he claimed that once again that he was proud not to be a politician, which is nothing but a steaming pile of bovine excrement. You know what? They cannot redefine it. They cannot go forth and make a mockery of our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights, because they are the ones who would be the first to try and implement a totalitarian regime. They would be the ones that would stand in staunch and stark opposition to the true ultimate wielders of popular sovereignty, we the people. That is unacceptable. It truly is. But of course, the Lion Branch Trumpidians who are huddling together in the Trump tabernacle don't want to acknowledge this. They don't want to accept credibility for it. They don't want to be held accountable and responsible for this disaster that they have foisted upon us. Now, I understand why Beck is saying that we really shouldn't be going after these people. It's because he is trying to be that better angel of our nature. He is trying to reach across that olive branch. And we started off that way here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. But the viciousness and the divisiveness that has become the hallmarks of this 2016 presidential election cycle simply cannot be ignored. They've gone out of their way to question our patriotism. They've gone out of their way to question our conservative principles and values, and they have certainly gone out of their way to try and besmirch and belittle our shared United States Constitution. They want to dismantle the birthright that is the greatest birthright of any people on God's green earth. That birthright of which I speak is none other than the Constitution, that wonderful social contract or compact, the greatest one ever devised by the hands of men, yet divinely inspired by providence above. Except they're not telling us what they want to replace it with. The only ones who are telling us what they are seeking to replace it with are the alternative or alt-right. And many of them are wanting to make it as a form of tribalism that is race-based, which again goes against the clear intent of the foundational documents of the United States of America. Go back to those poetic words that were first penned by Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed with certain fundamental and unalienable rights, and that chief among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You see, they don't believe that. They don't believe that those natural law tenets, which by their nature are timeless, apply. They think that it is weakness to embrace that. They think that that is what has led to the degradation of society. In a real sense, what they're doing is they're falling into the trap that has been set by the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftist. And this whole idea of détente, of live and let live, of refusing to hold people accountable. You can forgive, but you damn sure can't forget. And you damn sure cannot encourage this, because if you keep doing that in a repetitive fashion, they are going to trample all over us, because they think that we are feckless. Well, no, we're not feckless. If you go back to the foundational spirit of the United States, that spirit that was carried forth by our founding fathers, you recall that they tarred and feathered the Tories, those who remained loyal to the British Crown. And the Southern campaign in the American Revolution was just a precursor to the American Civil War, the type of animosity that flowed through it. We don't want to have to go through that. But we certainly should not discount that as something that may have to go forward. And therefore, we must be stalwart and hold people accountable for their words, deeds, and actions, because they are trying to do so with us, and the alt-right certainly has a reputation of going out and besmirching people's character, engaging in the tactic and strategy of character assassination. All of these deplorable, unspeakable, and heinous things they have engaged in. They have foisted that upon us. And so, no, they cannot just be allowed to slide by with that. They cannot be allowed to proclaim that they have done no wrong and that we just welcome them back with open arms. We can certainly turn to them and say, if you want to help rebuild this nation, all right, but you have got to earn our trust again. Respect and trust must be earned. It cannot simply be given. That is one of the realities that we've forgotten because we have fallen into the trap of the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist leftists who don't want to hold people accountable. And of course, that goes directly into this collectivist mentality that they espouse. They only want the government to be able to hold people accountable, not to have society hold people accountable. That is where moral relativism comes in. For you see, it was when we had a solid understanding, grip, and base on morality that society would hold people in line by having societal norms and standards. And yes, we still loosely do, but nowhere near the way we used to. And that's also why they want to attack the nuclear family. If you recall, if you look at the Communist Manifesto, you'll find that Karl Marx loathed and despised the family unit, because he inherently understood that that is the fundamental building block of society. That is the only way that you can propagate the existing structures to allow children to be reared in a stable and safe environment and thereby achieve their full potential. Well, no, he wanted the government to do that. And it's all part of that ridiculous notion that somehow history is merely linearly progressive. But history, like life itself, is cyclical. We face cycles all the time. Look at the seasons that we encounter throughout the year. Look at the rites of passage. That's not just linear, folks. It's something that each and every one of us encounter, and we encounter it time and again. It's what makes life beautiful. It's what makes life so fascinating and worth living. You see, the frothing at the mouth Fabian socialist, all of these radical extremist left-wing fundamentalists don't like joy. They don't like people being able to enjoy the finer things in life. They want to spread misery, because then everyone will become complacent. They'll look for joy. They'll start seeking a messianic figure, and that is what you do to begin dismantling the society that pre-existed the dark and twisted Fabian socialist agenda. But ultimately, it works against us. Ultimately, it turns against us and forces us into an untenable situation that should never be accepted, particularly in a free and open society like that of the United States of America. And again, folks, this is why we here at Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer, come forth and do these shows for you. We produce these shows to empower you. And it's all to give you the strength to stand up and say no to these charlatans who want to take everything away from you. Because ultimately it is our duty, obligation, but above all responsibility to proactively maintain and safeguard our fundamental and inalienable God-given rights. Because no one else can do that. No one else is endowed with that authority by the very design of this constitutionally endowed Federalist Representative Republic of ours. And we really shouldn't want it any other way. We shouldn't accept it any other way. Now, with that said, it is time for us to begin our descent. I'm going to go ahead and send the flight attendant back for one last round of alcohol, unless, of course, she's made some off-the-cuff trip to Mexico before we got on, in which case we've been flying without a flight attendant, and I don't think that would be acceptable. Anyway, folks, as always, I'm your captain, Randy Wright, and I want to thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. I invite you to leave any questions, comments, or concerns you may have, either here on our YouTube page or our Facebook page or our Google Plus page. And on top of that, I invite you to follow us at Twitter with the Twitter handle @RadioAviationEX. One more time, folks, that's @RadioAviationEX. And there you will find the departure board that lists my personal Twitter account, the personal Twitter account of my first officer, Jeremy Grapenton, our Blogspot account, which we're also putting up audio-only versions of our show for you to catch up on and download at your own leisure, and the Cafe Press account, which has all sorts of trinkets and goodies, including clothing, apparel, tote bags, watches, clocks, drinking glasses, you name it, we have it, with either our original logo on it or our first-class passenger logo on it. With such a wide array of products at reasonable prices, you're sure to find something you like, so feel free to give us a little bit of support and show your love for our country. As always, folks, thank you for choosing to fly the Wright Flyer. We'll see you again next time. Do take care.